Hello, this is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 14 of The Grief of Politics, and I am joined once again by Avin Carroll. Avin, how are you doing?
I am doing great. We're recording this on Saturday, February 12th, and up here in the Northwest, it is a gorgeous, clear, blue-skied, sunny day.
Yeah, I mean, maybe listen back to our episode on climate change and find out why. Yeah, that's cool. Oh, so I have a quick announcement. Well, actually, I'm going to ask you publicly. So I did this on my other podcast. I actually forgot to bring this up to you over the phone when we were talking about, upcoming topics and stuff like that when we do. Would you like me to put the podcast on Spotify? Because I have the power to do that.
I mean, I'm all for it. Anywhere we can share the platform out, we can find other people.
Yeah, that's the way I looked at it. I know there's a lot of talk nowadays about, well, we'll just say Spotify. And I know some people think it's evil, but I heard a local business here in Tacoma talk about it. He was actually a musician, and he said, well, one, people do care about your Spotify numbers, and two, they are a massive platform. So he said, no matter what I feel about Spotify, I'm just trying to get my music out there, and it is just a much bigger megaphone than maybe SoundCloud or something like that, which is exactly like the position we're in. So I did it with my other podcast. So I will, if you're okay with that, then definitely I will put it.
I say go for it. I mean, Spotify. I've got nothing against having it out there. It's not like it's going to take money out of our pockets because Spotify pays out such a pathetic, tiny little amount.
Yeah, except to what? That's another episode.
Yeah,
so
right.
How they
we're not getting paid for this anyway, right?
Yeah, I forgot to look at the new numbers of our podcast, but it stays pretty steady. We're still, we've been doing it a year, but we only do it once a month, and I have done a terrible job of promoting the episodes. So, yeah. Anyway, I want to remind you guys.
Your background isn't marketing, and it is okay, Joe.
It is not marketing. I want to remind everybody that this podcast hits once a month on the 20th of every month. And if you want to follow us, you can go to www.thegriefofpolitics.com and leave a comment below the episode. You can also write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Just let us know what episode you were asking a question about or a comment about. And, or you can say, hey, Avin said this one thing in this episode, or Joe said this one thing. If you have some topics you want to, you want us to talk about, something political, just let us know there. And you can drop us... or follow us. You can follow me on Twitter at JustLittleJoe. Avin, you don't have the Twitters, do you?
I do, but I follow it so much that I couldn't even tell you what my tag is.
I know what my handle is, and that's about it. I think I have, 6 followers. I don't know. Anyway, so just go there. Like I said, you can leave a comment. You can engage with us there. Write an email, or leave a comment below the show at our website. So this month it was your topic, Avin, and you picked legal marijuana. So I was actually I think people will be surprised. These articles you sent were really good. There was the National Law Review one that was incredibly, it was a little bit drier, but had a lot of facts in it. But I took about a page and a half of notes, and I'm going to go through what I think. And these were actually very eye-opening articles, because I think maybe like a lot of people, the moment you legalize weed, you think, well, we're done. We solved it. We fixed the war on drugs and crime. But I think these articles bring out, at least the war on drugs, that it's a many-faceted issue. It's not something that's very simple. So these were really good articles. So, yeah.
I mean, there was a lot in this that I was pretty surprised about. Kind of the idea I was going for in this is I really kind of wanted to get a better feel for where we are as a country now that we've begun to legalize marijuana across the country. It is still federally illegal, and kind of an overarching theme in a lot of these articles was the direction of the country moving towards a federal decriminalization or descheduling of marijuana. A little bit of conversation in here about states that are likely moving towards decriminalization or legalization through 2022. Yeah. And sort of the other reason I wanted to go into this is sort of the impact of legalization of marijuana as far as maybe recognizing its effects on the war on drugs and kind of the national conversation around drugs. I don't think we've discussed it here on the podcast, or if we have, we haven't discussed it in depth. But I have mental health challenges. I've struggled with depression since I was 14. This particular year, 2021 to now, has been especially difficult for me, and a lot of the research around medication-resistant, treatment-resistant depression being treated with ketamine clinics beginning to open up here in the Washington area, Northwest California, have had great results. Same thing with MDMA-assisted, ecstasy-assisted therapy, showing a lot of success. Psilocybin mushrooms, they've had some success in treating mental health issues. So I was going down this topic, kind of looking at how does the legalization of marijuana, I can talk, I promise.
We're really white, by the way.
Right.
That was so white.
The legalization of marijuana conversation, I really wanted to see if there was an impact on how that's affecting the conversation around other psychedelics being used in a mental health context.
Yeah, I mean, so what's your thesis? Like we both, when we pick a topic, we got to write a thesis. This is our news. Did you write a thesis, or have you?
Actually, Joe, specifically, when you said you wanted to start writing a thesis, you said, "I'm going to start writing a thesis, but you don't have to."
Okay. All right. Okay.
Unless you want to. But
no, I mean, you wrote to me too and said, "Hey, this is really hard. I don't know what to."
Well, see, the issue is, unlike most of our topics, I think this is one where you and I are going to align quite a bit. Like, there is no conservative versus liberal kind of debate between the two, particularly since I am libertarian, which tends to be more like, hey, make it all legal.
Yeah. We should do a. I think we should do an episode on libertarianism, because I think it is not. I don't think it's as cool as people think it is.
There are definitive challenges to it.
Yeah. I'm going to write that down actually in the notes right now while you're speaking.
As a topic idea, libertarianism?
Yeah, because every time I hear people say, I'm a libertarian, and even you sometimes, I'm like, oh, here we go.
I'm not a pendulette libertarian.
Okay. Is he like more of like let it all go? Like let it all?
Pendulette would describe himself as being so far on the libertarian spectrum that he's borderline anarchist.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that it's pretty far. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, I kind of these like I said, these articles are really good, and I took notes, and I'm really blown away by some of the issues they raise. That again, you decriminalize weed, make it legal in a state, and you think, oh man, problem solved, but it just started a whole bunch of new issues, which I guess like everything. But you're like, oh yeah, we're winning the war because more and more states are legalizing weed, but that doesn't, I guess it doesn't mean anything. So which article do you want to start with, Avin?
So, I think I'll first come off with my first impressions on all of these articles. They all sort of touched on the challenges that have come up since states have begun legalizing marijuana. I think Washington decriminalized recreational marijuana in like 2016. Oregon.
Right.
Very similar timeline. California was a little bit behind, but had already been legal for medical use. And then Colorado, a lot of the other states that have moved in this direction. The kind of shocking thing that came up was they discuss in a lot of these states now what's going on is the states have decriminalized it and begun to regulate it like alcohol or tobacco. And in so doing, they're now, what is the word? Enforcing taxes. But they're enforcing taxes at the growth. They're enforcing taxes at the sale. And it's a massive revenue generator. Like every state that has gone down this course has made...
I think it's in this article, but don't they say something like $2 billion for the state of California? There was like a year where I think it said...
Yeah.
It's at a massive amount. That was one thing I actually didn't write in my notes. I wrote the negative stuff in my notes because I was kind of blown away by a lot of this stuff. No, I feel like you. I do want to get into the articles because, again, I took quite a bit of notes. And I think, and strangely enough, each article that I took my notes kind of builds off the last one. Like if you go back to, like, anyway, yeah, it builds an argument in my note taking, which I was kind of amazed that It's almost like you planned it out like that, Alan. I read the articles in order, and yeah.
So let's see here. In 2020, legal sales of California reached 4.4 billion. That's not the taxes, but that's the sales. And that is the tracked and legal amount. Now, the overarching theme, kind of the thing that blew me away, thing that blew you away, was the effect of these taxes actually creating a bigger market and causing a growth of illegal growers and illegal sales.
Right, because we talked about it on the phone right before we got on, because we were trying to get the time right of when we could record. Like, the idea that, now instead of just growing it however you grew it before and just selling it to people with the overhead of just maybe some grow lights or whatever your operation was, now you have, like you said, taxes, and you may have employees, you have payroll tax, they tax, like you said, the growing and the selling of the weed. Mm-hmm. And one thing I thought was really interesting in the Cal Matters article, which is titled, it's really long. All these have like long titles, so I just went with the company that wrote it. So Cal Matters, it's called "Gavin Newsom was the face of legal cannabis in California. Can he fix its problems?" by Alexei Kosef on January 30th, 2022 at 9:30 p.m. Wow. Anyway, one thing I thought was interesting there was there's now a black market, like you said, because people are just growing weed. It's growing because, obviously. And then it says right here, local governments have to opt into recreational sales. Mm-hmm. 2/3 of the jurisdictions in California block the sale of marijuana, meaning the pool of people you're selling to is very small. So you're paying a high tax and you're bringing in less money. There's taxes on distribution and selling. The price to the consumer has increased in some areas as much as 50%. So if you can grow something, in your basement, at a friend's house, in a greenhouse, and just sell someone that comes over and just sell them weed, it's legal. You have a grow card. You're legally, you can just do that out of your garage or your space. You don't need a farm. You don't need a store. You don't need whatever. So yeah, if you're, I'll call them independent growers, non-taxable growers, you could just, you can make more profit, And anecdotally, there was another article I read a while ago that because of these jurisdiction things and weed being able to be sold in different areas, there's more supply than there is demand. So people got into growing it and selling it to hop houses.
Dispensaries.
Dispensaries. And there was more of those people growing it than they were able to push out the door. So that's probably another problem.
Well, and Lisa and I, I cannot remember the name of the show. Lisa and I watched a show on Netflix recently on kind of the business of drugs, and they specifically went around to different marijuana growers around California and sort of the marijuana industry that's grown in California. So,
right.
In some smaller counties, they're growing sub-industries not related to growing or reselling it from the perspective of like selling joints or selling edibles directly to the end user, but instead these businesses that are creating products from the marijuana, creating oils, creating
there's like CBD creams now for like joint
CBD creams,
like
creating the vapor, so like you can smoke it in a vape pen. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they went over is a lot of these industries or these kind of smaller businesses are growing out in counties that are already pretty economically depressed, and so they're creating good paying jobs in these sort of smaller communities because there's this whole new industry that they can do. The other thing is a lot of these people are sort of cutting edge. They're taking the giant risk. It's actually very American in its entrepreneurial, I'm going to take a risk, hopefully a bit high risk, high reward situation.
Yeah, why not?
Growing these businesses with the hopes of being able to sell nationally in the future. And the hopes that federally they don't have someone come in and raid and shut them down at any moment.
Right. Another thing in the article, that blew me. I think I kind of knew, but this article spells it out. And I think we talked about this on the phone too. Same Cal Matters article. Weed is still illegal under federal law. So growers, if they have financial problems, they can't get government assistance like loans, and they can't even get loans to get farmland because it's like, what are you getting land for? Weed. We can't help you. So some of the people they interviewed, they were like, I don't know. We have to dip into our savings. We don't know if we're going to grow a crop next year because it's just there's so much overhead.
One of the couples that they interviewed even went so far as to say they're not going to grow a crop because they can't make enough money and they can't take the loan out, so it's too big of a risk. Situation has reached a breaking point in recent months for growers, including Ingrid Song, who runs, I'm going to butcher this, Baija Flor Farms in Mendocino County with her husband, Jonathan Wenzel. Prices have fallen so far that their business is now losing money, and the couple is unsure they can afford to plant a crop this year. And the reason the prices are falling, like we'd said earlier, is the taxes are so burdensome that they've priced legal marijuana out of the marijuana market.
Yeah. Again, you can grow it anywhere, or if you want to grow it, you can. You don't need the overhead, so you can just say, hey, I'll sell you that for this much. You're like, wow, that's 25% cheaper or 30% cheaper than if I went to a dispensary. Of course, I'm going to go to my neighbor who has a legal grow card and, whatever is growing it, I don't know. So, yeah, it was really eye-opening.
Well, that's not one of the things they're talking about here, though, is a large amount of that legal growth is still, in one of the later articles, a lot of that illegal marijuana sale is being driven by illegal farms. That's not tracked. Like, they're putting up so many farms that the government knows they're going to close some of them, but the growers know that they're not going to get them all, and they can still sell at a better price. And they go into sort of the cycle of criminality that's still going on because of marijuana around this growth. I think it's in the next article, so we can go into that a little bit more in depth.
Oh, is that the Newsweek article, the Oregon?
On Oregon, yeah. Oregon grappling with pervasive amount of illegal pot farms after legalizing marijuana.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes to, like, the tax level in California is super high. And then in the National Law Review article, they discuss there's several bills that are out to sort of federally decriminalize it. But one of the things that they want to do in that bill, and one of the reasons it's having a hard time passing, is because they want to put a progressive tax on marijuana sales federally of 10 to 25%. Like, everyone in the government is sort of getting on board now and wanting to dip their hand in the bag.
Right.
And that doesn't help the marijuana become, an actual viable legal business because illegal people can still resell it. I mean, this reminds me a whole lot of prohibition on alcohol, right? They can grow it and sell it for far cheaper without being in, like, a legitimate men's club or whatever that was still legally allowed to sell alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's again, and just the second article, the Newsweek article about Oregon, the idea that you can, like, just steal people's water as well, like divert, like a creek dried up in the article because because people are illegally irrigating their farms, like diverted a creek is what it sounded like.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. They diverted an irrigation creek. So in this article, it's a Newsweek article published on the 16th of December, 2021, written by Katie Wermis. Maybe Vermis.
Yeah, Wermis.
Probably butchered that one. And it's, again, talking about the struggles of legalizing, creating billions of dollars in revenue, but also creating billions of dollars in criminal business because they can sell it for cheaper. And there's still a huge market that wants to buy it at a discount.
And like you said a few minutes ago, the police know that they can get some of these illegal farms, but they know they're not going to get all of them. They said it's basically, it's whack-a-mole. You take out one and then another one comes back. So,
and they can get it out, higher THC, far cheaper, far simpler distribution. It's easier for people to, buy from the guy that they've been buying it from the whole time without changing their process.
Yeah, another thing they bring up towards the end of the article is these cartels with these illegal farms will be like, hey, we'll pay you to come work on the farm, and then you end up working all day, and then they don't pay you. Or like one of these things, they actually pulled a gun on the guy and told him to get away. Like after he was done for the day and said, hey, I want to get paid for the day or whatever, they pulled a gun on him and told him to get out. Mm-hmm. So people are getting free labor out of these illegal farms, and they're able to undercut these legitimate businesses that are selling weed and going through the process and all that kind of stuff. So,
So later on in the article is the section you're talking about where the farmer talks about his water being stolen. And
right.
He talks about other farmers in the community, other people in the community leasing off their land and their water rights to these, quote, bad actors. He says if somebody walks onto your property with a suitcase with $100,000 in $20 bills, you kind of know they're not on the up and up. And if you take that money and allow them to do something on your land, you should probably anticipate that they're to break the law.
Right.
That they're there to break the law. That's a little bit of a tongue twister, but not. Which is true, right? Like there's people out there that are still kind of complicit. Like they're still taking the money because, hey, like $100,000 to take my water rights, like that's cash in my pocket right now and I need it. So
yeah, it's and that's the thing though, is like you're probably losing money really farming if they're diverting all your water rights. You can't grow real crops, and they come and say, hey, it's hush money, right? Like they just come to you and say, hey, we're going to use your water, shut up, take the money. And if you take the money, are you culpable in what's going on? Like this, I don't know. I mean, I'd imagine it brings up a lot of legal issues. Since we're talking about legal issues, I do want to get to this National Law Review article. It's pretty good.
Well,
it's very long. Yeah, it's a little dry, but they're trying to obviously get the facts. So this is I gotta scroll up because I was reading sections. The National Law Review was written by Jennifer N. Lee, Shepard Mullen, Richard and Hampton LLP. It doesn't have a date, but this is, I think, just an overview of things. Now, this is a very long article. Here's my takeaway from the article. It mentioned the banking system, like in the very first Cal Matter article we read about if these bills go through, it will allow farmers to use federal aid for pot farms. That's a lot of the reforms. One thing I thought was interesting, Clarence Thomas, Justice Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, conservative, says that the half-in, half-out approach doesn't work. There's also a Safe Banking Act in the Senate, or it dried up in the Senate, and a MORE Act. And there's also a Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, and I want to read that because I think it's very interesting. So I'm just going to read this little section. It's called the Cannabis. Section. Right. I'll be as quick as possible. The Cannabis Administrative and Opportunity Act, embracing the Moore's goals for comprehensive reform. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, along with Senators Cory Booker and Ron Wyden, introduced the long-awaited draft of the CAO into the Senate on July 14, 2021. Considered a historic and ambitious bill, the CAO aims to implement a full-scale federal scheme for cannabis reform and reaches beyond just decriminalization. It hopes to provide restoration measures to lift up people in communities who were unfairly targeted in the war on drugs, which I think is interesting. Specifically, the CEO seeks to do the following. Now, they have a bullet-pointed list, and I think a lot of these are interesting. Decriminalize cannabis by removing it from the Controlled Substances Act and automatically expunging any arrests and convictions for nonviolent federal cannabis offenders. That is pretty amazing. Transfer primary agency jurisdiction over cannabis to the Food and Drug Administration, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms so that cannabis can be federally regulated similar to alcohol and tobacco. Establish a Center for Cannabis Products responsible for regulating the quote, cannabis aspects of all products containing cannabis, end quote, and implementing requirements related to cannabis products. Good manufacturing practices, standards, labeling, basically within the FTC. Mandate federal research and studies regarding the impact of cannabis, including any benefits or impairments. This is something that came up years ago. I was reading that because it is not federal. It is not legal, not federally legal. It is hard for scientists at university to go to the government to get grants to study the effects of cannabis. Mm-hmm. And we will probably be talking about that very soon because we have another article about that. Permanent movement of cannabis products through channels of interstate commerce. So you can actually transport weed to other states. So maybe there's a state where they can't grow it. It's whatever, the environment isn't right and it's too expensive. You could just drive it there, and that would open up things for the growers. They'd be able to, go to whatever. Establishing opportunity trust fund programs by federal cannabis tax revenue to restore and reinvest in communities greatly impacted by the war on drugs, including funds for job training, reentry services, legal aid, and youth recreation mentoring programs, and help level the playing field by granting entrepreneurship of color access to cannabis industry without small business loans, prohibit the denial of federal benefits or immigration protection due to past cannabis-related offenses. So that is important. That kind of goes into the first point of expunging someone's record. The last thing, impose federal excise tax on the sale of cannabis products starting at 10% and increasing up to 25% in the span of 5 years, with certain favorable tax credits for cannabis producers with less than $20 million of sales. Now, there is problems with this because they talk about later in the article, there's too many bills. There's the MORE Act, the SAFE Act, the CAO, all this stuff. You need one piece of legislation that will hit hard, what they say. They mentioned some of them are better than others, but I think this is interesting. The fact that they were going to literally expunge your record, I think, is pretty amazing. And that people that have their record expunged, it doesn't affect immigration status and stuff like that. So,
So, one of the other interesting things in these first three articles that was reading through was we tend to do a conservative, liberal viewpoint discussion. That's sort of our target. And on this one, as libertarian, like I said, I tend to be in favor of decriminalization or legalization of most drugs, for the most part. There's some wiggle room in there in my philosophies, largely because it's not a cut and dry and simple issue, just like almost anything on the federal level. But one of the things that stood out is even the conservatives, for a fairly large part, like you were talking about, Justice Thomas, are fighting this a lot less now, as more states have begun this process. At a state level and at a federal level, there is less resistance to it, if not outright support. The very next section of this article, after we talk about the CAO, is the State Reforms Act, which they refer to as the SRA for simplicity purposes.
Another one.
Is a comprehensive reform bill led by Republican Representative Nancy Mace and introduced in the House in November of 2021. Like the MORE Act and the CAO, the SRA, State Reform Act, also seeks to decriminalize cannabis and provide retroactive expungement for non-violent federal cannabis offense, except for any person involved in a drug cartel. And they go into the details of kind of how it separates itself.
One thing I thought was interesting. One of those, one bullet point I wrote down is they said one of the bills actually has bipartisan support, but that bipartisan support equals 4 Republicans. So I would think there would have to be more, but apparently that's all you need for bipartisan support.
Didn't the CARE Act, or was it the MORE Act, or SAFE Act or the MORE Act, one of the two of them actually passed the House in 2020 with more than half of the Republicans on board.
Right. I think they're talking about for these other bills, but I think the last note I wrote on here, and they bring it up in the article, is there's far too many bills. You got to do one you got to do one. Like maybe jam these bills together, take some stuff out. Again, they rate some of the bills in there, and this is just a review, so I don't think they're really giving. They do give their opinion, but they kind of do it from a legal thing of like this is too much, or this isn't enough, or whatever. So
their closing paragraph, and I think this does a good summation of it, is it says, regardless, until Congress can iron out the kinks on comprehensive cannabis reform, the Safe Banking Act of 21 remains a practical law to pass in the interim, because it's not quite as comprehensive. The Safe Banking Act of 2021 is currently the least controversial of all the cannabis reform bills has substantial bipartisan appeal, and will provide immediate financial resources and relief to the largely cash-based cannabis industry. Which I kind of agree with, right? Like, marijuana growers, farmers are, in large part, more mom and pop type organizations or small business organizations.
Yeah.
So the ability to access that extra capital through banking, that ability to kind of backstop the struggles that they're having financially and know that they've got a bit of a safety net so they can invest into higher efficiency manufacturing, distribution, management of their crops.
Yeah.
Will make a lot of these smaller farmers a lot more competitive. And I mean, that's the first article. What they're talking about with Gavin Newsom is he, he championed this as he was running for governor. Legalize marijuana. Legalize marijuana. I think he was lieutenant governor actually at the time. And now has sort of turned their back. And a lot of the pot industry in California is really frustrated with him because he's not helping them.
Right. I think it was one of the articles said it's almost like the war on drugs 2.0. Of like, we've legalized it, but we're not really going to do anything else. You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of on your own. Like it's a...
Well, I think it's a lot like what you and I have already said. Both you and I were kind of shocked that this is the position it's taken because it's not being broadly discussed in our communities that there's this struggle between, legal and illegal sale, growth, and distribution. Or maybe growth, distribution, and sales of marijuana. And the off topic or the off the head thought is states are bringing in a ton of money, the business is doing really well. I used to live half a mile away from like 3 or 4 different marijuana dispensaries. They always had people in and out. They were constantly staying busy. I've known several people who use them and buy products from them legally, and I don't know that I know a single person that buys it illegally. So you don't really see on the surface anymore that there's still a pretty large underground illegal distribution of marijuana. So it was very shocking to see that, and I think that's a large part of what's going on with regulators now, as we're now several years into it. The illegal community has had time to adapt, because initially I'm sure they were like, well, crap, now we can't sell marijuana, let's move on to other drugs.
Yeah, it's so expensive.
Only to find out that there's still a demand because people can't afford to buy it legally. The people that are buying it legally are most likely the people that weren't before in a lot of cases. Not everyone, but a lot of cases. Because they were the ones that didn't want to buy it when it was illegal, but now can.
Right. Yeah, this was really informative, Again, you think it's legal, it's done, but you see like all these challenges. They're just another business where this is just completely, it's too challenging. And they're just like, we need help, we need these loans.
Yeah.
Like if anybody else can go to a bank and ask for money, why can't we? The idea, like we're floating here. We need you to throw us a life vest or something.
And so at this point, reading through all of these, sort of my position and thought was like, wow, okay, this is way more complex than I thought, but it's still a direction we want to move. There's still pretty broad support for decriminalization of marijuana. There's still pretty broad support for taxation. So sort of the next step would be federal decriminalization, and where are we at in that process, which is what we're talking about here in the National Law Review and kind of the direction. Chuck Schumer has recently been pushing it. I think you mentioned earlier Dan Crenshaw has been a little bit more open and public in support of it.
That kind of gets into the last article, the idea, if you want to talk about that, which it goes more into the broader picture of legalized recreational drugs, not just marijuana. So, by the Walrus, which I've never heard, but this art for this article is pretty amazing.
I believe it is a Canadian publication, just from the way they were talking about it. Very, very heavily focused on Canada and the UK.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, this article, it's from the Walrus. It's called "Why It's So Hard to Legalize Recreational Drugs" by Jonah Burnett. And it's
Brunette.
I didn't take as many notes on this one. It was pretty amazing. There's somebody that came out with something called
Pace.
Ezekiel Golan. He came out with a drug called Pace, which basically the reviews, reading the article, the reviews said it doesn't taste that good, but you get the effect of alcohol without the hangover. So someone tipped off that someone tipped a media outlet off that maybe they should interview this guy. That tipped off the authorities, and I wrote this down. Pace was labeled as a Schedule 1 substance, which puts it up there with heroin.
In a matter of months, within 9 months,
yeah,
it had been shipping to like 1,000 customers, and Golan had been marketing it as, how did he put it? A panacea for our postmodern, late capitalist lives, capable of curbing excess in everything from food to shopping to sex. And the positive reviews were a big reason why it was spreading sort of underground. And when it was reported, the Canadian authorities came in and classified it as Schedule 1 in like months. I think they said they did barely any research on it, and they like sort of immediately categorized it as a heavy illegal narcotic with no
and
legal
he went through a journey of, he studied chemistry and stuff. He even he actually started doing psychedelics himself for religious purposes. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. He started to literally open his mind up to the possibility that these could be used for therapeutic purposes, and started experimenting with psychedelic, is what it sounds like. More psychedelics, and test everything on himself. They link articles from The Guardian, which I clicked on. And everybody always tries to get him with, hey, someone got hurt off this. Does that upset you? And they said at first he was, very apologetic, but he's been asked it so much. He said, how come nobody's asking this of like people that produce alcohol or whatever, like there's car wrecks, like I don't want to be mean, but like so few people have died on my substance as opposed to alcohol when it's, paired with a moving vehicle. I thought this last paragraph in this article was really fascinating. It says right here, and so as his legal appeal drags on, Golan is hedging his bets. His latest innovation is a non-psychoactive liquid fertilizer that, when sprayed on certain leafy vegetables, causes the plants themselves to produce MEAI, which is the chemical that causes some of the psychedelic reactions. These greens can be eaten in a salad, blended into a smoothie, steeped in tea, or smoked to experience the drug's effects. It's tempting in light of Golan's past to view this breakthrough as just another scheme to circumvent prohibition, this time by laundering his drugs through nature itself. But he insists that the process, which he calls human-assisted cytosynthesis, is profoundly more. Quote, it's bridging the gap between the natural and the synthetic. Nature had a hand in this creation, which everything he said he tries it on himself first. So I think that's interesting. I've never really heard of a scientist doing that, testing something out on themselves, unless it's a movie and there's a terrible, something terrible happens. Basically.
There's a really famous author out there, and I can't remember his name. He's famous for a book that he published about how to produce a lot of psychoactive substances, where to find them in nature, and he's pretty broadly known for taking his own medicine, so to speak. He got in a ton of trouble for producing this book and distributing this book.
It wasn't Leary, was it? Dennis Leary, the guy from the 60s? Because I heard Leary was kind of, from what I heard behind the scenes, is he was a little bit of not a scam artist, but he kind of just liked the drugs. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't really about, the we're all in this together type, the hippie message. It was more about, hey, are you holding? That's what I heard from a lot of people, is he liked getting high, and, which is fine, but like, a lot of people look towards that for the message of togetherness, and he was just in it for the drugs, I guess.
I mean, so that's going to be the case for everything, right? So that kind of comes back full circle. I'm going to wrap up kind of my opinion here, and then I'll come back to that kind of last part of the discussion. The main reason I went to this Walrus article is kind of back to my earlier conversation, my pseudo-thesis of kind of how is the legalization of marijuana moving us towards the legalization of other drugs, or at least the reduction in categorization. particularly here
Well,
in
it's
the United
also
States.
like it is a good blueprint, right? Like you see what marijuana is going through, and you can kind of look at the road ahead if you're into psychotropic drugs or
So there's already this
whatever.
discussion happening in the state House or the state Senate here in Washington. There's a state representative that is wanting to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms for research, particularly related to mental health treatment. He doesn't want to open it up to the whole group. And ironically, we're having the exact same conversation over this as we were having with legalization of marijuana. Oh, well, if you legalize it for medical research, then kids are going to get a hold of it. Which, let's be honest, legalizing marijuana for medical use resulted in kids getting marijuana. Because people found ways to get the loopholes. They would take their parents' stash, or they would have a friend get a card and share it. It didn't happen in mass. It wasn't like more kids were smoking pot and like there was this catastrophic collapse of society because of it. But it did happen in small amounts.
Right. Well, what I find strange about that argument, I mean, I've heard some people it is, and some people it isn't a gateway thing, right? Some people are like, I smoked weed, I'm done.
Well, it's not the gateway drug argument that I'm making. It's just the access.
Right. Well, I mean, my thing is, it's been around. Like before it was legal, you could get it. Everybody knew a guy, and it was always a guy. Everybody knew a guy. So, and I would like to see the studies now. I mean, it's been legal for what? I know in Washington it's been legal for what, 10 years at least,
in some capacity.
So, like, I would like to see studies of like, has usage gone up? That's one thing I didn't look up. I think it ebbs and flows and always kind of stays.
Well, and I've known multiple people that have gotten it for medical purposes and found that they just not only don't enjoy it for recreational purposes, but it wasn't really helpful for them medically. Yeah. It may help with one thing, but made things worse and for other stuff. That
was one thing they brought up, I think, in the law review thing was veterans. So because it's federally illegal, some veterans would like, and the psychic drugs, like you took the psychotropics we talked about, but these people have to go to other agencies. They can't go to the VA. Like, so I think somebody I know that was a veteran said that their doctor kind of like out of the side of their mouth was like, you could do this, but I can't prescribe it for you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a regular doctor that could just, since it's legal in their state, could just write you a prescription. You can go to a dispensary. I have to kind of tell you to just go to a dispensary. So, I mean, that would be something I think that would be good if you see, if it's decriminalized, then on the federal level, doctors of VA could be like, have you tried THC? You might give it a shot,
So, towards the end of this article, because that's kind of their whole thing, is like, why is it so difficult for us to move forward on these recreational drugs and decriminalize? And they go in depth into this article. They talk about the difficulty of getting it researched, of getting licensed so you can research this stuff, the studies that you have to go through before it can be brought to market, and how challenging that can be.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for a lot of people who are sort of these weekend chemists or developers like Golan here. But it's also the case that we have for in the United States for like large-scale research, like pharmaceutical companies want to go out and research these drugs, but they can't. It's completely illegal.
Right.
They have to get special permission from the government. And we ran into a lot of this with medical marijuana research. Now that it's legal in a lot of states, we're seeing a lot more research about marijuana use start to come out. And the publications are just starting to come out as they're able to do broad research in a lot of places that they couldn't do before. So the kind of counter argument that they make in this Walrus article is like, why is marijuana illegal? Why is ecstasy?
Alcohol. Alcohol is the big thing they keep bringing up of like.
Correct. I was getting to that.
Oh yeah.
But you cut me off. I was working my way in that direction, which they ultimately come back to. Why are all of these things illegal when they have very low effect on deaths, on incidents of violence, whereas in Canada, let's see here, the line is, in Canada, alcohol was responsible for 80,000 hospitalizations between 2016 and 17. More than were caused by heart attacks, and over 3,000 deaths in 2015. More than were caused by car accidents. This was in Canada for that statistic set. But another article I was reading, or maybe it was in a different spot on this article, really goes into depth of like how deeply and how broadly alcohol use has impacted the community. And it's largely because it's the legal place that people can go for decompression from stress.
Yeah, I think that
recreation.
was in the article. It said basically it's the legal method that people use to relieve stress.
And historically, it's been around forever, right? Like, how long has it been that humans have gone to alcohol for decompression, for stress, right? Like, we've been drinking alcoholic beverages that get us drunk or get us buzzed for thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, I might do one later today. I don't know. I haven't decided.
Of which, like, totally not related to this, but I remember watching a documentary recently where they're talking about the development, not the development, but the advent of tea in Western society, and how that brought in caffeine, the advent of coffee and how it brought in caffeine, and chocolate. And all three of these, they were beverages that people had to heat water, boil water to drink. And that was the advent of where mass sections of the population are drinking these new beverages and they're not drunk all the time. And we start to have this enlightenment. Like, people aren't living in a constant buzz because you used alcoholic beverages to drink for safety.
Right. Well, yeah, that was the thing about how, there's a documentary, an old one called How Beer Saved the World, and it just had to do with the fact that boiling water to create beer led to less bacteria in the water, that led to less sickness. People weren't just drinking pond water anymore. Like, in fact, as part of that documentary, some lab people took some incredibly disgusting pond water that they were in a lab doing tests, and it was disgusting. And they boiled it. They made it into beer 8 weeks later. They called it duck pond beer, and they gave it to people at a bar. They had a small batch, and people go, oh, my God. But they go, no, this is what saved civilization, because people were just drinking water, what they could find, but it may have been sewage runoff. It may have been, like from
out of the Thames, right?
Yeah, like disgusting. And so by them just boiling water to make alcohol in a still and letting it ferment, all that stuff killed the bacteria, and they showed it under a microscope. Here's how much bacteria is in the pond water, and this is kind of what people were drinking back then, facsimile, and then here's what it is afterwards. So, like, yeah, and then I still don't buy their thing for the first alcohol, though. They had some weird theory that somebody came home from the Mediterranean or the Mesopotamia, like the rich Delta Nile, and just decided to drink water that was laying out. Maybe they were thirsty, but it had fermented, which I don't know. I mean, maybe. I mean, stranger things have happened, I guess.
I mean, many, many things that we eat and drink, we don't know the origins, but we now enjoy, like cheese.
I mean, that's
how
does
does cheese happen where you're like, oh, I'm going to eat this.
Yeah,
really old cheese.
That too in the process. Like curdled milk, where you're like, we'll just wait. Like, what do you mean?
Or like,
should we eat it?
The advent of haggis. Whoever thought that would be a good idea?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, anyone that's Scottish listening to the show, but I mean, you think about it.
No, they understand. They're like, I have it, but I don't get it. Eggs too is another thing. Of like, you see an egg, you're like, let's crack that and put it over a fire. Like, who did that?
So, back on track here, sort of the point being, like, we've been drinking alcohol for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So, of course, there's a very high level of resistance to criminalizing alcohol. But it also causes a lot of problems. And in the modern world we live in, right, people aren't going home and drinking beer because it's what's available to drink and getting buzzed or drunk and then going to sleep and getting up and going to their agricultural job anymore. We're sitting at home, getting drunk, we're watching TV, we aren't processing our issues because we have way more complicated lives. We got to deal with all of the stresses of, retirement, 401ks, taxes, traffic, everything else. That
life is terrible sometimes, yeah.
Right? Like, we're beyond the point of how am I going to survive? That's no longer our challenge, and we've gone into this whole nother, like, existential struggle that we live through in a modern Western society.
Right.
So, if that's the case, and we know alcohol causes all these problems, health issues for the drinker, health issues for the family members around him, mentally and physically, risks and dangers on the road, like, why are these things illegal when other drugs tend to have less of an effect? People don't generally get stoned and want to go drive. People get stoned and order pizza or DoorDash.
I mean, that's just helping the community. I mean, you think about all the independent pizza, like or you go get snacks. I mean, come on, So yeah.
From a recreational drug standpoint, like, there is so much illegal research coming out on the use of psychotics treating mental health issues, PTSD, medication-resistant depression, anxiety.
I would direct people. There's a podcast listened to called the Medevac podcast, and the only reason I'm bringing this up and interrupting you is they don't have ads on their podcast, and they say the only reason they do that is because they just want people to share the podcast. I didn't write the episode down, but if you go look through their feed, they did have somebody, a veteran. They're all veterans. Some of them have been injured or amputees. Some of them are still medics or whatever. I think they're all retired out of the armed forces. But anyway, they had someone on that was doing some of this research and working with researchers. And the best line I remember hearing about was one of them said, we sat around after we did a round of some psychedelic and we were all recovering. They'd sleep or whatever afterwards. They drink a lot of fluids. And he said, one of the guys said, what, I can't believe it, but the hippies were right. Because it allows them to really get in touch with their, deal with their PTSD or help deal with their PTSD or the trauma they've experienced in war. And that quote will always stay with me. The idea that, I can't believe the hippies were right. There is benefits to this. And Dan Crenshaw has come out and said that he's kind of supportive of it. And I think it's because veterans, people that he knows, are like, oh, yeah, maybe, maybe there's something to this,
And, again, it was a documentary on Netflix. I wish I could remember the name of it. They do, I think it's The Business of Drugs. It's one of the episodes where they talk to a retired Army soldier who came back from combat with severe PTSD. He was ready to kill himself, and somehow he got referred into an MDMA trial, a therapy trial. And I think it was 3 to 5 sessions that he went through with, in a controlled setting, with a medical doctor and a mental health professional, took MDMA, the base drug of ecstasy. I only say the base drug because ecstasy is very frequently adulterated or not what you think it is.
Like every other drug that you buy from a guy. Remember I said a guy?
Ecstasy is one of the most adulterated drugs out there because you can put all kinds of stuff in it and sell it as ecstasy and never know what's in it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You get it from a guy. You don't know.
Mushrooms are mushrooms.
Yeah, heroin can be fentanyl nowadays, too.
Well, that's true. But, you're only going to get maybe one of a couple things. But ecstasy is very frequently cut with other stuff, and it's very hard to know what you're getting. So that's why I specify. MDMA is what most of us think of when we think of ecstasy versus what a lot of people get on the street. Anyone listening to this, if you're interested in recreationally using MDMA, make sure you trust your source.
Yeah, make sure you trust the guy that you're going to. It's always.
We're not saying any of this to endorse any of these behaviors, no. And go out and use these things recreationally and have a blast, but just to kind of have the conversation around it. And that soldier, after 3 to 5 sessions, was like, my life turned around completely. I was completely fixed. And one of the big reasons that it's so effective is MDMA creates a automatic feeling of connection with people around you. Mm-hmm. And breaks down a lot of the barriers that we have with being vulnerable and being willing to share. So it's fantastic as a medication for going through therapy because, I'm going to sneeze here in a minute. Maybe not.
Oh, whoa.
Okay.
You held that one. Are you going to blow up now? You really held that one in. That's dangerous. That's really dangerous.
It's incredibly effective because it opens people up to the point where they're willing to bring up a lot of these deep struggles and to really talk through them. But they also internalize a lot of that conversation and process through it much more effectively. But it's a Schedule 1 narcotic. And even when it was made a Schedule 1 narcotic, therapists and psychiatrists were banging on Congress's door, don't do this. We haven't researched it. This can really help people. And we're just now beginning to come back. Ketamine. Ketamine, frequently referred to on the street as Special K, is a cat tranquilizer, if I'm not mistaken. But they
give that to a lot of soldiers too. It's a painkiller as well, I think.
It is used as a painkiller, and it is a dissociative medication. It creates a dissociative response. So it's separating your conscious mind from your physical body. And so you're experiencing thought outside of your physical sense. Now, it's not like you're outside of it, but what's going on with your body is a separate thing that you observe. from your thinking.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's what I've heard. I don't know.
they have had, well, I've never done it, but yes, exactly what I've heard. They have had tremendous success for people that are medication resistant depressives, like major depressive disorder, being treated with ketamine. And they describe it as, I've heard this described in multiple places, you develop a thought pattern in your life, especially if you're someone with severe anxiety or depression. You grind into your brain these ruts, and it's like skiing down a mountain slope. And every time you go down, the ruts get deeper and deeper. And eventually you can't get out of the ruts, no matter how hard you try. It's just too deep. Mm-hmm. And when people go through these ketamine treatments, it's like a fresh snow filling in the ruts and allowing them to set new patterns.
Have you ever thought about doing it? Because you said in the beginning that you've been suffering from depression for a while. Have you? If you could get in a trial, would you do it? Would you?
So this is one of the reasons that I'm hugely in support of this kind of research, and it's one of the main reasons I wanted to go into this particular topic. So that's why I chose the Walrus article. I'm very curious about doing it, but currently, because of its legal status, your insurance will not pay for it.
Oh.
And
what about if you're part of a trial, does that change? Like,
well, at the moment, like they're not even really doing trials because it's illegal to do trials. What's happening is illegal ketamine clinics are popping up, and these businesses are basically hoping the feds don't come in and shut them down or arrest them.
Would you have to be? Would it have to be part of like a college thing?
No, it is illegal to research it.
Oh.
Because of its classification. No, maybe it is a little bit different with ketamine, because ketamine is actually like a legal drug in use. MDMA, it's completely illegal to research it. There is no...
Well, I mean, if you're interested, I mean, I'm sure it's going to be difficult, and you're probably not going to get in. But if it's a college or something, you may be able to join or get on the list for or something.
So you can hop online and look it up. There's multiple ketamine clinics in Washington State. They're opening up all over the United States. And it's completely available, but... because it's illegal, not authorized, your insurance companies won't pay for it. A friend of mine I was speaking with recently is looking at going through ketamine treatment for himself, and his own doctor even suggested it. And in that conversation, doing the research, they brought up that it's $3,000 a treatment, and a minimum of 3. So you're paying $6,000 to $9,000. No, maybe it's $2,000 a treatment. Maybe it's $6,000 completely out of pocket. You got to pay. So this is not a treatment that's accessible for people that are
not with the U.S. healthcare system.
Not
with the U.S.
making really good money, or like has a ton of money just sitting around to spend on something like this.
Yeah,
it's a huge issue to take care of in our lives, and I would love to see this research getting approved. It is not an expensive medication, but there's a ton of risk and a ton of overhead to do it when you're a clinic that's basically like, we know this helps people, but everything we're doing is 100% illegal.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, maybe you could talk to your doctor. Maybe they got, if you're interested, I mean, your doctor may have some kind of information on a study or something that they're like, it's illegal, but it is a study, so like they're not going to come in and bust the door down because you have a whatever.
Potentially, but I don't qualify as medication-resistant depression. There is an actual specific medical definition of it, and it's that you have to have tried 3 separate antidepressant medications for a minimum of 3 months apiece at the maximum dose, and found that none of them helped. In my case, in the last year, I have done 3 different medications, and I haven't been able to go to the maximum dose on 2 of them because the side effects, like my mood improved. But like one of them, my depression mood, like mindset went away, but I then became topically depressed because I didn't want to do anything. Like there was no point to life anymore. It wasn't like I was muted. I still had emotions, feelings, positive and negative, but it was like, well, I don't want to get up out of my chair. I don't want to read. I don't want to like play video games. I don't want to do any of the things that I enjoy.
That's a weird. That's always that. Whenever you hear a drug commercial, you know, it's like this will help with heartburn, but it may cause depression or suicide. And you're like, whoa! I think I'll take the heartburn, man. I think I'd rather. Some of those are really bad. Like that sounds like that's a case where you're like, some of these side effects sound a lot worse.
So, in that process, of course, had to then go to the doctor added a medication on top of that one, which did not help. I went back to the doctor. I'm like, I need off this other medication. Like, I can't function like this. So he cut the dose in half, but he didn't want to make just a random change until I talked to a psychiatrist, which took 3 months. Happy, joy, joy. Go through that process. Now I'm on the 3rd medication. I'm still not at maximum dosage, but I think it's helping. I've only been using this now standalone for 3 months. Obviously, if that works, then I wouldn't qualify again to go in and do this. And I think a large reason that these clinics are doing it that way is because there's still not a large body of evidence. And
they need people like you to go in and go, I guess I'm your guinea pig. Do the study on me. Like, they need people like that to say.
There's still not a large body of evidence, and there's still a ton of risk. And so I really think these clinics are really trying to reserve that level of treatment for people that really need it. So one, it can show the dramatic change. Someone that has been struggling for years and hasn't been able to be treated and been brought over. And because it's considered such a dramatic treatment. And then eventually the public image of it, the efficacy of it will shift, and it'll become a more common treatment. And maybe even a first stage treatment. Like, oh, you're dealing with severe, like an actual major depressive disorder. You're not depressed because something bad happened. Your football team lost the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I got that. I got the first thing. You're depressed because something bad happened to you.
Right. Like, everyone goes through short-term periods of depression in their life, right?
Yeah.
We all struggle with it. A family member dies. We get into a negative rut. It's very hard to get ourselves out. It takes time.
Yeah. Maybe several of them die. Yeah.
Several of them die. Yeah.
Yeah.
You lose a job and you can't find one. You're no longer the caregiver and provider for your family that you want to be or think you need to be. Maybe you have to go back to your family and
move back in with your parents.
Back in with your parents or something else.
Midlife,
really your ego.
like, I messed up, whatever.
Like, situational, short-term depression. Like, this isn't where you would want to use this type of treatment. It'd be overkill. But for people that deal with major depressive disorder and have for years, even if their normal medication is working, the ability to take people off of those medications and get rid of the side effects, as I've been researching antidepressants over the last year, reading through forums, and like, I've found people that are on 2 or 3 separate medications and have been for 5 years, and they just live with the side effects because they're no longer suicidal.
Yeah.
But
they have other hot dog fingers and like weird.
They're still not living life to the fullest. They're just not wanting to kill themselves. Well, that's not really being alive. I mean, it is. But
I guess that's the definition of I'm okay today. Like, I'm not great. I'm okay. Like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, to close out the conversation, I am fascinated by the challenges that the legal weed growers have to go up against, and I hope that there's a solution for them. I think it seems like the biggest linchpin reading all this information for me and taking notes was the federal legality of it. If that gets pulled and they're able to use federal funds, I think that would go a long way to alleviating some of what these growers are going through. And then decriminalizing people's backgrounds, giving grants to low-income people, the BIPOC community, the people of color, minorities, to allow it to go to other areas. There was somewhere in that article, someone was quoting figures, and they said, most of these communities are white that are growing the weed, and that isn't that. Like you brought up, other people, these after-school programs that can teach, not teach kids, but like there should be something else. Like, we should be able to share the wealth and whatever people do.
Well, and I think a large part of I would agree with you on that, and I think a large part of that is you have to keep in mind that the legal marijuana industry is under all of this heavy regulation and all of this tax burden. So then the product is expensive, and so people in economically depressed communities, which frequently are BIPOC, can't afford to buy full price legal marijuana, and so they're probably a large part of the under the table industry, the illegal industry,
right? Yeah,
because it's the only way they can afford it.
Yeah. Well, do you have anything to wrap up? I mean, you kind of did at the end. Is there anything else you want to add before we exit the podcast?
I think a really big takeaway for me on this is, like you said, the the underground industry that's grown up around legalization of marijuana. I do think it's something that will get addressed. It'll just take a while. And for me personally, sort of the direction I was intending to go with this originally, you said it, I think exactly. Like it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap for other systems and processes. It allows us to see where are the pitfalls with something that's a little bit less extreme, right? We're not putting LSD out on the street for, 15, 16-year-old kids that are still mentally developing. But we are doing it with marijuana where the process is a little bit less extreme and we can really see, okay, the tax structure is a little bit too extreme here. We can't really do that. Okay, the legalization is a little bit too light-handed. Maybe we need to stiffen it up a little bit over here.
I mean, it would be pretty amazing if these things got rolled in together, so you could go to a dispensary, get, if ketamine wasn't controlled or whatever. You could get that, and then that'd probably be a little bit more difficult. You probably have to have a prescription for that, I would imagine, or something.
I mean, from my own experience, the use of ketamine for depression treatment, anxiety treatment, same thing with MDMA, needs to be done in a controlled setting.
Yeah, that was one thing in that Medevac podcast they mentioned where, like you said, you do 3 treatments and you take time between them. It's like months, between whatever. Yep. And the guy that was giving the speech said it was weird because, like, after the first one, a lot of people were coming up to me within a week, like, I want to go back. And he's like, you have to wait. Like, you naturally, it isn't good to do anything that much, your body needs to decompress and, you whacked out the serotonin in your mind, which is fine for the experience. But, like, there's, like everything else, there needs to be studies. How soon can you do it again? Mm-hmm. Is there an adverse effect if you do it too much? Stuff like that. So
I just... in the 1970s, we started this whole war on drugs, and we got really zealous about it. And it's a place where politicians can really look like they're doing something to fight crime, and it's a place they can point to and say, "Look what I did."
Yeah,
but it's had
we
way
probably.
more
I'll write that
negative
down
effect
too. We should probably do something on the war on drugs because I think it is not what we thought it was going to be, and it has changed so much. I think it is a moving target. So yeah, so. If that's it, Evan, I think we're done. I want to remind everybody that this will hit our website, www.thegriefofpolitics.com, every month on the 20th of the month. It hits at 7 in the morning. So go there, leave a comment. Let us know what you think of the show.
7 Pacific.
7 a.m. Pacific time, yes. West Coast, Best Coast. Anyway, you can write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Let us know what episode or, if you have a comment about the episode. Or, write us there. Avin, is there anything you want to plug before we're gone?
First off, you didn't mention it, but I'm going to mention it for you. Also, check out Joe's other podcast,
okay.
Gaming with Grief.
I was going to plug after you plug, but yeah, thanks, man.
It's a fantastic podcast. If you're a gamer, as well as someone who enjoys the discussion of political issues, you might enjoy both podcasts.
Here's what I found.
Yeah, they're separate feeds, though. Just let people know so you don't have to...
They are. For myself personally, I have a side business as a real estate agent. It is not my primary occupation.
Okay.
And
this is going to be a new announcement. Another one?
No. And the purpose of that business is not necessarily to help people buy or sell their homes directly, although if someone does want me to, I will. But the purpose primarily is to help people find qualified, successful, talented agents that they can work with so that they can get the best buying or selling experience out there. It's called Your Agent Guide. You can find me at youragentguide.com. Follow me on Facebook. I post daily little news updates.
You're doing more video now too, right? You've been doing some video, but you said you're going to do a little bit more.
I will be doing more kind of editorial video where I'll discuss a little bit more about state of the market, what's going on in the industry, but also giving tips and tricks, how to pick an agent, how to interview an agent. Nice. Do you need an agent? In what situations don't you? That stuff will be coming, but I'm not 100% sure when I'm going to be able to do that. The stuff I'm putting out right now is really just very simple advice. And then once a week I put out just a little bit of video with some kind of statistics and information.
Yeah.
So, if that's something you're
Go
interested,
there.
check that out.
It's all helpful. So next month is my time to pick, and I talked to Avin about this on the phone. It's a new edition, but we're going to talk about the Supreme Court. But more importantly, we're going to talk about the shadow docket, which is something that is coming more and more in the news. Avin said he doesn't know much about it. The elevator pitch of what I've read is basically it is when the Supreme Court doesn't want to do a massive decision or have a massive litigated thing, they just write something called the shadow docket. So this is the elevator pitch. If anybody's listening to this in the legal world that thinks that I'm wrong, I'm learning about this too. But basically, that's what happens. So there's been problems with the shadow docket because it is being leaned on more than the actual Supreme Court. So instead of them hearing arguments or having evidence brought in, they're just writing, even though they're coming together as all justices, they're writing more shadow docket material than hearing cases, or at least there seems to be more of an emphasis on it. So I'm interested to hear more about the shadow docket, and we'll be talking about that next month. So I guess with that, everybody have a good month, and we will talk to you again in a month. Bye.
Bye.